In this video, we'll discuss how to interpret a gel after doing electrophoresis to separate DNA fragments of different lengths. Generally, when we run a gel of a DNA sample of unknown length, which we did in these two lanes, we run them next to a lane containing a marker DNA sample. This marker DNA sample contains segments of DNA of known lengths. So we can see in this marker sample, we have 9 segments of DNA and we know the length of each segment. When you run a gel, this DNA will separate just like your sample, by size, leaving the bigger fragments closer to the wells and the smaller fragments closer to the end of the gel. When these fragments are separated, you can assign each of them their own length and then compare your unknown sample to the marker DNA. This will give you a rough estimate of how big your sample fragments of DNA are. So say we know the length of all of these DNA fragments in the marker sample. We can assign each of them their own length. So let's say we know that the largest sample is 40,000 base pairs, and the smallest fragment is 500 base pairs. Then we can estimate that our sample DNA segments that line up with these segments are about the same length. So we would be able to identify these bottom DNA fragments as about 500 base pairs long. We can do the same thing with the rest of these DNA fragments by comparing their length to the marker DNA and estimating their size relative to the marker DNA. We can make these assumptions because the distance DNA fragments travel is determined by their size. So when DNA fragments travel the same distance through a gel in the same amount of time, they're going to be the same length. So there you have it. You can now estimate the size of unknown DNA fragments using a marker lane of DNA running concurrently with them in a gel.